My plan was clear, concise, and reasonable, I think. For many years, I have traveled in many parts of the world. In America, I live in New York, or dip into Chicago or San Francisco. But New York is no more America than Paris is France or London is England. Thus, I discovered that I did not know my own country. John Steinbeck, in his 1962 book, Travels with Charlie. I suppose we're all born with it, already pumping in our veins from the day we arrive. It's been stitched in the fabric of America, much like the pleasures of baseball and apple pie. But the Great American Road Trip is a much more universal language. The yearning to hit the road in search of more can be traced back to the beginning, in the landing on the eastern shores. When roads were uncharted seas, our wheels were wood vessels, and when hope in the unknown felt like freedom.
I wanna be loved by you, just you, nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you, alone.
Fast forward 200 years, and we wanderers, now generations invested, were taking to unclaimed roads again, this time further west, to the edges of the Louisiana Purchase and extending to the Pacific. Hope of financial stability lay in boundless plots of land to the west and a gambler's promise of wealth hiding in the hills. Carried on caravans of canvas and wood, powered by hefty broncos stamping their hooves to new soil, thousands of families left behind their familiar lives once again, being pulled toward a golden unknown.
Nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you.
And at the turn of the 20th century, these families mounted a new steed. Built of steel and fueled by fluids, the automobile gave life to convenience and options. Progress pushing us toward the more familiar definition of the American road trip. One behind a steering wheel and fastened to four tires. Inside an upscale San Francisco country club, during a 1903 gathering, a visitor would boldly place money on a cross-country automobile trip that had yet to be achieved. San Francisco to New York. This visitor would be Horatio Nelson Jackson, a retired Vermont doctor with more ambition than gambling sense. Those opposed claimed that the automobile was nothing more than an unreliable fad that would die out like the hundreds of clumsy mechanized devices before it. But Horatio, stubborn and determined, embarked 4 days later with a bicycle racer, Sewell Crocker, and a pit bull named Bud by his side. Through many trials and tribulations, mechanical issues, and untamed trails, 63 days later, the trio arrived in New York with their bright red 1903 Winton touring car dubbed the Vermont. The first true American road trip, completed by two tenacious men and their dog. Though Horatio never claimed his betting spoils, the accomplishment alone paved a path for the everyday adventurer to mount a vehicle and see their country, a gateway to accessible travel. We now had our chariot, the bubbling and bouncing vehicle kicking up dirt in its wake, made affordable by Ford's new assembly line process. But there was one main obstacle left: nature. Thousands of miles of dense forest, rocky ledges, and beating rivers. But in 1926, Cyrus Avery, a businessman turned public servant, would commission a sustained road from Chicago, Illinois to Santa Monica, California. This 2,448-mile stretch would be known as Route 66. By the 1930s, when it filled the highway with tourists. Although Route 66 had been almost entirely paved at this point, we were vagabonds, not vacationers. Thousands of families making their way west to California, once again in search of something. This time, jobs. The Depression and a massive Midwest drought forced us to forget any life of luxury and return to the basics. Travelers road tripped for sustenance. But times changed again. War breaks out in America goes back to work. Route 66 is put to work as a military supply line, feeding materials and goods to crafty hands across the U.S. The war effort invigorates a struggling economy. And when the dust clears, the travelers return, victorious, to a mended home. One much more prosperous than the decade before. We now have money, excess even, the capabilities to trade our currency for new experiences. And this links travel to luxury. Freedom is more attainable than ever. We are given the ability to trek through our own home that felt so unfamiliar, not just for survival, but now for leisure. By 1955, 75% of American families owned an automobile, and the country was forever changed because of it. The way we vacation changed. Along Route 66, theme motels became a staple, their bright neon signs guiding their guests west along paved strips of black ribbon. Crests of bright blues and pinks, acting as call signs for prospering businesses, were dotted along desert roads, infusing with sunsets and horizon lines. An economic boom. Little farm towns now transformed into tourist meccas. Barren lands became picturesque location for family photos and future keepsakes. And the American road trip became our culture. For some, it became a lifestyle. Famous novelist and poet Jack Kerouac would take an aimless road trip between 1947 and 1950. His chronicles of the trip would finally be published in 1957 with his novel On the Road, and would spark a new generation of road trippers. Driven by jazz music, poetry, and drug use, the beat generation was born. Many elements of the beat genre would later inspire the hippie movement in the 60s and 70s, where road tripping was a way of living. The classic Volkswagen buses being a sanctuary to those who lived and loved on the road. Sleeping, eating, experiencing America was all from their domicile on wheels. The Nobel Prize-winning author John Steinbeck made one last trip in 1960. He knew he was sick, and he wanted to see his country one more time. He took to the road with a camper named Rocinante and his poodle, Charlie. 10,000 miles and 288 pages of text later, Steinbeck published Travels with Charlie, In Search of America, a critique of his country, singing his praises and voicing his concerns. Somewhere along the way, these roads deemed the main streets of America lost their shine and allure, Once the quickest ways to travel, roads like Route 66 now had competition. President Eisenhower had returned from Germany after the Second World War with the impression of Hitler's Autobahn left on his mind. Multi-lane networks allowing large streams of traffic to flow smoothly across the country is something he felt America needed. Two-lane highways were nice, but not sufficient to keep up with the growing expectations of our fast-paced society. And thus, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 was passed, allocating $26 billion to construct 41,000 miles of four-lane interstate highways. But the plan had pushback. Highway revolts took place in San Francisco, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and New Orleans. And in some cities, the protests were successful. Their neighborhoods were saved from demolition, and the interstates came to an awkward, abrupt end. But the majority of the Highway Act went unchallenged. And because of this, the first of the coast-to-coast highways became nearly obsolete. Why travel the back roads when straight-shot, high-speed limit super roads got you there in a fraction of the time? Our desire for quicker living had choked out those little towns that had flourished under the deluge of Route 66. The once strong heartbeat was now just a faint pulse. Our story of road tripping isn't necessarily a comeback story. David doesn't defeat Goliath in this tale. Our society hasn't slowed down, it's sped up, exponentially, to the point of nearly on-demand everything. Traveling across country can be accomplished in hours thanks to the accessibility of commercial flights. And even if you do choose to drive somewhere, our GPS is pre-programmed to the fastest routes like interstates and toll roads. Considering the past 10,000 years have trended towards us finding ways to make and do things quicker, I don't see us slowing down anytime soon. Although life is sped up, we are not so different than the generations before us. In the 1600s, refugees searched for freedom from persecution. In the 1800s, we searched for wealth and a home. In the 1930s, we searched for wages. And in the 1950s, we searched for leisure. So what are we searching for today? What is the purpose of us finding these back roads again? We are not claiming land, we are not searching for a meal, and the shiny neon palaces are now only dilapidated vestiges of their former selves. John Steinbeck wrote, "Memory is at its best a faulty, warpy reservoir. I had not heard a speech in America, smelled the grass and trees and sewage, seen its hills and water, its color and quality of light. I knew the changes only from books and newspapers. But more than this, I had not felt the country in nearly 25 years. So it was that I determined to look again, to try and rediscover this monster land. Otherwise, in writing, I could not tell the small diagnostic truths, which are the foundations of the larger truth." We are not all writers, but we are all crafters. Just being alive means that we are crafting opinions and views. Despite our vocal attempts of not judging people, judging is who we are. At its core, it's an evolutionary trait that has kept us safe for years. But staying in our own circle can taint judgment. Strong opinions are formed from faraway distances. Traveling is a remedy. It connects us to places, people, and perspectives that we have not considered before. It transforms easy categorical labels into real, complex people. Not people from news articles or storybooks. People who have lives and reasons as to who they are. We have such a large country, so varied in climate, terrain, and personalities. And I think that's a big reason as to why America uniquely caters to road tripping so well. No corner looks nor feels the same. And it's all at our fingertips. So much to see, so much to learn, and so much to find. no matter what we are searching for. Quiet Town is a weekly audible road trip written and produced by me, Cody. Tune in every Monday for a new episode. Also, please subscribe and give us ratings. The first 8 weeks of a podcast life is essential to its success. I'll also be giving away a $50 gas card to someone who writes a 5-star review on our iTunes profile. So rate away to enter. Also, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Quiet Town Podcast. Become a Quiet Town member at our Patreon page and get exclusive content and early access to episodes. And check out our website to join our newsletter. That's quiettownpodcast.com. Episode 1 is up next and available right now, so add it to your queue and enjoy. And of course, thank you for listening.